They say New York City is a living beast, a creature made of steel, glass, and raw ambition, breathing steam through manhole covers and feeding on the dreams of those who dare to walk its streets. For those at the top, in the penthouses that scrape the clouds, the city is a chessboard illuminated by gold. But for those crawling down below, in the long shadows cast by these towers, the city is an open jaw, cold, unyielding, and always ready to snap shut. On that particular Tuesday night, winter had decided to show its teeth. It wasn't just snow, it was a physical assault. The wind howled through the concrete corridors of the avenues, cutting exposed skin like razors of ice. The temperature plummeted, turning the sludge in the gutters into stone and breath into dense clouds of vapor that vanished as quickly as hope. In this desolate landscape, a man walked. His name was Ethan, but names matter little when your stomach has been twisting with hunger for 2 days. Ethan did not walk with the posture of the strong man he once was, the construction worker who lifted steel beams with his bare hands. He walked hunched over, as if carrying the weight of the sky on his back. And in a way, he was. On his shoulders, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of mold and smoke, was Tommy. Tommy was 6 years old, but the weight in his bones was that of someone much older. Malnutrition had stolen the volume from his cheeks, leaving his large blue eyes protruding like lighthouses in a stormy sea. He coughed, a dry, metallic cough that made his father's thin body shudder with every spasm. Ethan's mind spun in a cycle of guilt and despair. He thought of Sarah. He remembered how she made him promise, on her deathbed in that public hospital in Detroit, that he would take care of the boy, that he would never let the system swallow him whole. Ethan tightened his grip on his son's legs against his chest. The boots he wore, scavenged from a dumpster months ago, had holes in the soles. With every step, the slush bit into his toes with frozen teeth, but he kept moving. To stop meant to die, and dying was not an option, not while that little heart beat against his back. They reached Fifth Avenue. The contrast was obscene. Shop windows glowed with warm, golden lights, displaying coats that cost more than Ethan had earned in his entire life, jewelry that could feed a whole neighborhood for a year. And there, separated only by tempered glass, was human misery, invisible to the rushing passers-by who averted their gaze. Ethan stopped in front of Sterling Plaza. The building was a black and gold spear pointed at God, a monument to incalculable wealth. The lobby, visible through the revolving doors, emanated an inviting amber glow. Ethan could almost smell the expensive coffee and clean leather. But there were guards, large men dressed in suits worth more than Ethan's existence, standing like modern gargoyles, ensuring the filth of the street didn't stain the Italian marble floors. It was then that fate, with its cruel sense of humor, set the pieces in motion. A long black car, an armored Lincoln, slid silently to the curb, crushing the dirty snow with immense tires. The driver stepped out, opened the rear door, and the world seemed to stop for a second. From it stepped Victoria Sterling. The press called her the Iron Lady, the Ice Queen, and that night she seemed to justify every title. She didn't wear clothes, she wore armor made of haute couture. A charcoal gray wool coat, perfectly cut, wrapped her slender frame. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, defying the chaotic wind. She stepped out already speaking into a phone. The fury in her voice was palpable. She was firing someone, or perhaps buying a company, with the same coldness one orders a glass of water. She was irritated, distracted, consumed by rich people's problems, deadlines, mergers, profits. In her haste, as she adjusted the crocodile leather bag under her arm, something happened. A sudden movement, a slip of fabric on fabric, and her wallet fell. There was no sound. The snow dampened the fall. The rectangular object, made of soft leather and stuffed with limitless credit cards and cash, landed softly in the gray slush just a few feet from Ethan's tattered boots. The car drove away. Victoria marched toward the building entrance, oblivious to the loss, and Ethan stood there. Time dilated. He looked at the wallet. In his mind, he didn't see a stolen object. He saw steaming hot soup. He saw a cheap motel room with a noisy but functional heater. He saw cough syrup to soothe Tommy's raw throat. The primal instinct of survival screamed in his ear, "Take it and run. Vanish into the shadows. Save your son." But then another voice emerged, Sarah's voice, the voice of his own father, a man who died poor but honest. Ethan looked at Tommy's small hands clutching his neck. What kind of man would he be teaching his son to be? He closed his eyes for a second, swallowed the bile of hunger, and made a decision that would change the course of 3 lives. He ran, not with the agility of a thief, but with the heaviness of a weary man. He held Tommy with one hand to keep the boy steady and grabbed the wallet from the mud with the other. He charged toward the lobby lights, his voice coming out hoarse, broken by the cold and disuse. He shouted for the lady. But the world of the wealthy has invisible walls and very real guard dogs. Before Ethan could get close to Victoria, who was standing near the elevators, 2 dark shapes intercepted his path. The violence was swift and efficient. A heavy hand shoved Ethan's chest. The slippery marble floor of the entrance betrayed his feet. He fell. The sound of Ethan's body hitting the floor was muffled, but Tommy's scream was sharp and terrifying. The boy rolled to the side, crying, calling for his father. The wallet, the object of discord, slid across the polished floor, stopping right at the toes of Victoria Sterling's high heels. The scene froze. The lobby fell silent, except for the sobbing of the child. Victoria turned slowly. Her face was a mask of disdain. She looked at the dirty man on the floor, trying to get up, bleeding from his nose. She looked at the guards, who were ready to strike again. And then her eyes landed on the wallet, her wallet. Victoria's mind, conditioned by years of corporate betrayal and urban paranoia, traced the most obvious and cynical narrative. She didn't see a hero returning a possession. She saw a performance, a scam. She approached, the sound of her heels echoing like a judge's gavel. She ordered them to let him go, but her voice held no mercy, only morbid curiosity. She asked what he thought he was doing. Ethan, wiping blood with the dirty sleeve of his coat, tried to explain. He stammered that she had dropped it, that he only wanted to return it. He didn't ask for a reward, though his eyes begged for help. Victoria laughed, a short, humorless sound. She picked the wallet up from the floor with her fingertips as if it were contaminated. She opened it, checked the contents quickly, and then her cold eyes fell on Tommy. The boy was huddled against his father's leg, trembling with fear and cold. He was blonde, pale, painfully beautiful, an angel covered in soot. And that's when the accusation came. Victoria asked with a cutting voice where he had gotten that child. She looked at Ethan, dark-haired, skin weathered by sun and dirt, rough features, and then at Tommy. To her, they didn't match. To her, it was impossible. She accused him of kidnapping. She accused him of using a stolen, pretty child to garner pity and run scams on wealthy women in hotel entrances. Ethan's indignation was volcanic. For the first time, he raised his voice, not as a beggar, but as a father. He shouted that this was his blood, the only thing he had left in the world. He spoke of the mother's death, of the journey from Detroit. Victoria hesitated. There was a raw truth in that man's voice that her business reports never contained. But she couldn't back down, not in front of her staff. She made an executive decision.
She wouldn't call the street police. She considered them incompetent. She said she would handle this herself. She ordered the guards to take the trash and the boy to the penthouse. She would call her own contacts. She would find out the truth, and if he was lying, she promised he would rot in a cell.
The ascent in the private elevator was a journey to another world. The digital panel counted the floors at a dizzying speed, letting gravity pull Ethan's empty stomach downward. Tommy buried his face in his father's coat, scared by the pressure in his ears. They were rising to Olympus, but it felt like they were heading to the gallows. When the doors opened on the 80th floor, they didn't find a home. They found a mausoleum of modernity. Victoria Sterling's penthouse was vast, echoing, and frighteningly impersonal. 20-foot glass walls displayed New York like a carpet of lights below, distant and silent. The floor was polished stone. The furniture looked like uncomfortable sculptures. There were no photos, no flowers, no life, just the soft hum of the central heating system, which to Ethan and Tommy felt like the warmest embrace they had felt in months. The guards, brutish and efficient, shoved father and son into a guest room that was larger than the family's entire old house in Detroit. The order was clear: don't touch anything, don't leave. The madam will come to interrogate you. The door closed with a heavy electronic click. Ethan didn't look at the luxury. He didn't touch the Egyptian silk sheets on the bed. He fell to his knees before Tommy. His trembling hands began to unbutton the boy's damp coat. There was a desperate tenderness in that moment. Ethan checked his son's fingers, looking for signs of frostbite. He rubbed the small frozen feet with his rough hands, blowing warm air onto them, whispering empty promises that everything would be okay, that it was just a misunderstanding. Tommy looked at his father and asked if this was heaven because it was so warm. The innocence of the question cut Ethan's heart deeper than any blade. He smiled, a sad, broken smile, and said yes, it was a sort of castle, and they were secret visitors. Meanwhile, in her office that resembled the command center of a spaceship, Victoria watched. The high-definition screens showed the guest room in black and white. She had a glass of rare whiskey in her hand, the ice cracking in the amber liquid. She expected to see criminal behavior. She expected to see the man rummaging through drawers, looking for hidden jewelry, or being rough with the child now that there was no audience. But what she saw defied all her prejudices. She saw a man ignore his own hunger. There was a bowl of decorative but real fruit in the room. Ethan took an apple. He polished it on his shirt until it shined, and then he handed it to the boy. He watched his son eat, swallowing his own saliva without asking for a single bite. She saw the man take the boy to the bathroom, washing his face with a soft towel, treating him as if he were made of porcelain. Victoria leaned closer to the monitor. She saw the look of absolute adoration in the child's eyes for that dirty man. Kidnapped children don't look at their captors like that. Scared children don't sleep in the laps of monsters. Victoria's certainty began to crack. A small fissure appeared in the dam of ice she had built around her heart. She set the glass down on the table. The sound was loud in the silence of the office. She needed to go there. She needed to look into his eyes without the cameras. The guest room door opened again. There was no knock, just the silent invasion of authority. Victoria Sterling entered. Her presence filled the space, bringing with it the scent of expensive perfume and the chill of the hallway. She no longer had the guards behind her. This time she came alone, armed only with her wallet and a doubt gnawing at her stomach. She walked to the glass table that separated her world from theirs. With a slow, deliberate movement, she placed the wallet on the surface. The leather hit the glass with a dull thud. She told them the money was all there, every bill, every cent. Her voice didn't tremble, but the frustration in her words was palpable. For a woman used to everyone wanting something from her, this man's honesty was a disturbing puzzle. Victoria crossed her arms, protecting herself with her armor of high fashion, and demanded the truth. She didn't ask, she ordered. She told Ethan she had the means to find out who he was, that a lie in that moment would seal his and the child's fate in a prison cell. She wanted the story, not the street version, but the version he whispered to the mirror when no one was watching. Ethan stood up. He looked displaced in that pristine environment, a stain of reality on a perfect painting. He looked at Tommy, who was now sleeping on the giant bed, curled up like a hibernating animal. Then he looked at Victoria. His voice came out raspy, scratched by the cold and the lack of civilized conversation. He began to speak, and as the words came out, the penthouse's luxury walls seemed to disappear, replaced by the gray streets and sterile hospitals of his memory. He told the story of Detroit. It wasn't a quick tale, it was an autopsy of his life. He spoke of Sarah, his wife. He spoke of the leukemia diagnosis that arrived on a sunny day, turning light into shadow. He described the sound of the machines in the hospital, the smell of disinfectant that never left their clothes, and how the health system, voracious and impersonal, swallowed everything they had. The house with the swing on the porch? Sold. The car? Sold. The savings for Tommy's college? Gone in weeks of treatments that didn't work. Ethan reached into the pocket of his dirty pants and pulled out his most precious possession. It wasn't money nor gold. It was a photograph. The paper was worn at the edges, creased from being folded and unfolded. He extended the photo to Victoria with a trembling hand. Victoria hesitated, but took it. The image showed a different time, a younger Ethan, face full and clean-shaven, holding a woman with a luminous smile and light hair. Between them, a baby, Tommy. The resemblance was undeniable. The same blue eyes, the same shape of the chin. Victoria looked from the photo to the skeletal man in front of her, and then to the child on the bed. The genetic proof was there, printed on cheap paper. She felt a tightness in her chest, a physical sensation of discomfort she rarely allowed herself to feel. Shame. She had looked at a grieving father and seen a predator. She had looked at sacrificial love and called it a crime. She handed the photo back to Ethan without a word, because there were no words in her business language to ask forgiveness for something so brutal.
The silence stretched between them, heavy and dense. Victoria walked to the panoramic window, turning her back to Ethan. She looked at the city below, at the lights of Manhattan shining indifferently. Her calculating mind worked fast. She couldn't just open the door and send them back into the blizzard. Her conscience, long dormant, had been awakened, but so had her pragmatism. If the press found out she had kicked a sick child out into the cold, her company's stock would plummet. But more than that, she didn't want them to go. Not yet. She turned, her face once again composed in the mask of the Iron Lady. The proposal she made was not one of charity, it was a transaction. She told Ethan she wouldn't give them handouts. His pride, she realized, wouldn't accept it, and her pride wouldn't allow such weakness. The offer was stark. They would stay. There was a servants' quarter at the back of the penthouse, a space the staff rarely used. They would have a roof, heat, and food. In exchange, Ethan would work. He wouldn't be a guest, he would be a useful ghost. He would clear the snow from the terraces where the wind cut like knives. He would do the maintenance the other staff refused to do. He would pay for every hour of that warmth with the sweat of his tired body. Ethan's reaction was quiet. A lesser man might have felt the insult, but Ethan looked at his sleeping son. He saw the color returning to the boy's cheeks. He saw Tommy's chest rising and falling without the convulsive coughing. In that moment, Ethan would have agreed to scrub the floors with his own tongue if it kept his son safe. He accepted, a solemn nod, a pact sealed not with a handshake, but with a look of mutual understanding about what must be done to survive. And so the routine began. Ethan transformed. He wore gray work coveralls that hung loose on his thin shoulders. His hands, calloused and wounded, polished the gold railings until he saw his own distorted reflection. He carried heavy boxes, fixed leaking faucets, moving through the house like a shadow, always head down when Victoria passed, but always with a watchful eye on the door of the room where Tommy drew pictures. Tommy, in turn, lived in a golden limbo. Victoria, in a distant and almost clinical manner, began to let gifts appear. One day, a box of expensive brand-colored pencils appeared forgotten on a table. Another day, a new winter coat, which she claimed was a sample from a failed collection destined for the trash. Ethan knew the truth, but kept his silence. It was a delicate dance of dignity and necessity.
But not everyone in that ivory tower was happy with the new inhabitants. There was a shadow in the hallways, a shadow wearing a black suit and an earpiece. Marcus. Marcus was Victoria's head of security, an ex-cop who had been kicked off the force not for incompetence, but for excessive force. Marcus viewed Victoria's penthouse as his kingdom, and Victoria herself as property to be guarded and controlled. He fed her paranoia, whispering about enemies and threats, making himself indispensable. Ethan's presence was an insult to Marcus. He saw the way Victoria sometimes looked at the vagrant, not with disdain, but with curiosity. He saw how the child's presence brought a strange light to the boss's cold eyes, and Marcus hated it. He hated losing control. To him, Ethan was a disease, a bacterium that had entered the sterile bubble and needed to be eliminated. On a gray, rainy afternoon, while Ethan was out on the terrace, soaked to the bone, unclogging a frozen gutter, Marcus entered Victoria's office. The sound of Marcus's shoes on the hardwood floor was heavy, predatory. He carried a manila envelope. Victoria was at her desk, reviewing contracts, tired. She asked what it was. Marcus, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, placed the envelope on the desk. He told her it was the truth. He said that as a security man, he couldn't rest while a stranger slept under the same roof as her. Victoria opened the envelope. Inside were forged papers, a fabricated criminal report. Marcus had used his old corrupt contacts to create a perfect lie. The content was damning: aggravated robbery, assault, and the cruelest blow, suspicion of domestic violence prior to spouse's death. The silence in the room became deafening. Victoria read the words and felt her stomach turn. Domestic violence was the trigger. Victoria had seen her own mother suffer at the hands of violent men. It was her deepest trauma. Reading that about Ethan wasn't just a disappointment, it was a personal betrayal. She looked out the window. She saw Ethan out there in the rain, working. Minutes ago, she saw a dedicated father. Now, through the dirty lens of Marcus's lie, she saw a manipulator, a monster wearing an angel's face to hide his nature. Marcus's voice was a poisonous whisper in her ear. "I warned you, ma'am. These types never change. He's waiting for the right moment. He and the kid. It's all a scheme." Victoria closed the envelope. Her hand trembled, not with fear, but with contained fury. The Ice Queen was back, and this time the ice was thicker than ever. She ordered Marcus to leave. She said she would handle it. But she didn't kick Ethan out immediately. No, her wounded mind wanted something more. She wanted to test him. She wanted to see the monster appear. She wanted to prove to herself that all men were, deep down, the same.
The Cold War settled into the penthouse. Victoria, poisoned by Marcus's lies, decided she needed to see Ethan's true face. That night, Victoria hosted a business dinner. She invited investors, Wall Street sharks who ate weakness for breakfast. And to serve the table, she didn't call her usual catering team. She called Ethan. The humiliation was calculated. Ethan was forced to wear a waiter's uniform that didn't fit. The sleeves were too short for his long arms.
The collar choked his neck like a noose. He entered the dining room where the crystal chandelier cast light on porcelain plates and silver cutlery. The smell was of roast beef and expensive wine, a violent contrast to the canned soup he and Tommy ate in the back room. Victoria sat at the head of the table, magnificent and cruel. When Ethan approached to serve the red wine, she stopped the conversation. Silence fell. All eyes turned to the man with calloused hands holding the crystal bottle. "Careful, Ethan," she said, her soft voice loaded with barbs. "That bottle costs more than the house you claim to have lost. Try not to shake so much. Is it withdrawal making you shake, or is it guilt?" The guests laughed, polite, dry laughs, like breaking glass. Ethan froze. The heat rose to his neck. He felt the shame burn, not for himself, but for the son sleeping a few yards away. He looked at Victoria. He didn't see the woman who had brought toys for Tommy. He saw the monster the world said she was. But Ethan didn't break. He didn't shout. He didn't throw the bottle. He didn't confirm the history of violence Marcus had invented. He took a deep breath, swallowed the poison of wounded pride, and poured the wine, drop by drop, perfect, spilling nothing on the white tablecloth. He responded with the silence of dignity, and that enraged Victoria even more. His calm seemed like arrogance. His patience seemed like manipulation.
As the dinner ended and the lights went down in the penthouse, a shadow moved through the corridors. Marcus knew Victoria's patience was hanging by a thread, but he needed a final cut. He couldn't risk Ethan surviving another day. In the darkness of the living room, Marcus, wearing latex gloves, opened Victoria's personal safe. He knew the code. He was the head of security after all. He removed a specific piece, a diamond and sapphire necklace, an heirloom from Victoria's mother. It was the most sentimental and valuable object in the house. Marcus walked silently to the back room. The door was ajar. The sound of Tommy's soft breathing and Ethan's tired snoring filled the air. Marcus crouched beside the boy's small, old backpack, which leaned against a chair. With a perverse smile, he slid the necklace into the side pocket, mixing the cold diamonds with playing stones and broken action figures, the perfect crime. Innocence used as a hiding place for guilt. The next morning brought the storm, not outside, but inside. Victoria was awakened by Marcus's shouts, "Robbery! Thief!" Chaos ensued. Victoria ran down the marble stairs, her silk robe flowing. She found Marcus in the living room, pointing a finger at Ethan, who stood disheveled and confused, holding Tommy in his arms, trying to shield the child's ears from the shouting. "Your mother's necklace is gone, ma'am," Marcus yelled, acting his role with theatrical perfection. "I saw him prowling around the living room last night." Victoria looked at Ethan. Her eyes were red, tired. "Tell me it's not true," she whispered, but the doubt had already taken deep root. "Search their things," she ordered, her voice dead. The guards, under Marcus's command, grabbed Tommy's backpack. They dumped it upside down on the pristine floor. The sound was heartbreaking. Plastic toys hit the ground, and amidst them, the unmistakable and accusing sparkle of sapphires and diamonds. The silence that followed was worse than the screaming. Victoria looked at the jewel. Then she looked at Ethan. "I gave you a roof," her voice cracked. "I fed your son, and you steal the only thing I had left of my mother?" Ethan fell to his knees, not to beg for forgiveness, but from shock. "No, I swear, I never saw that. Someone put it there. Victoria, look at me. I am poor, but I am not a thief." Tommy began to cry, scared by the large men and his father's distress. But Victoria had already closed the doors to her soul. "Don't say my name," she said, cold as the winter outside. "Get out, now."
before I call the police and send your son to foster care."
The expulsion was swift and brutal. There was no time to pack, only to grab coats and the profaned backpack. Marcus escorted them to the service elevator. Before the doors closed, Ethan turned to Marcus. He was thin, weak from past hunger, but in that moment, his eyes burned with righteous fire. He stepped close to Marcus until their noses almost touched. "I know what you did," Ethan whispered, low and dangerous. "God knows what you did. Pray she never finds out, because the day she does, not all her money will save your black soul." Marcus just smiled and pressed the lobby button. The doors closed. The descent was a burial. Ethan hugged Tommy, who sobbed quietly. "Daddy, why is the lady angry? Did we do something bad?" Ethan had to swallow his own tears to answer. "No, son, we didn't do anything. Sometimes the world is just confused." When they stepped out of the building, the thermal shock was violent. Their bodies had adjusted to central heating. The wind at 10 degrees below zero hit them like a physical sledgehammer. The snow was deeper now. The city seemed grayer, more hostile after tasting comfort. They were castaways in an ocean of concrete and ice once again. And this time, hope was dead.
Up in the Golden Tower, Marcus's victory seemed complete. The necklace was back in the safe. The house was silent again. But for Victoria, the silence brought no peace. It brought echoes. She sat on the sofa, holding the necklace. The gemstones felt like ice in her hands. She looked at the floor where the backpack had been dumped. She saw something the guards had left behind in their haste, a small crayon drawing. She picked up the paper. It was a childish drawing, crooked and colorful lines. It showed 3 figures, a tall man, Ethan, a small boy, Tommy, and a woman with a crown, Victoria. Above, in shaky, childish handwriting, it read, "My family in the castle." Victoria's heart stopped. A tear fell onto the paper, staining the wax. A criminal doesn't teach his son to draw this. A violent man doesn't inspire this kind of love. The doubt returned, but this time it turned inward, toward her own house. She remembered Marcus's smile, how quickly he had solved the problem. Victoria stood up. A cold fury took hold of her. She walked to her office, but she didn't go to the main computer Marcus had access to. She went to a hidden panel behind a modern painting. Victoria was paranoid. She knew Marcus controlled the security cameras, so weeks prior she had installed a hidden backup system, a fisheye camera in the living room that recorded to a private cloud, inaccessible to her security team. She accessed the system. Her hands shook as she searched for the date and time. 3 a.m. The video loaded. The image was black and white, but sharp. She saw the empty room. Then she saw the door to the service hallway open. A figure entered. It wasn't Ethan. The figure walked with the confidence of someone who owns the place. It was Marcus. She saw him open the safe. She saw him take the necklace, and she saw him walk, tiptoeing to the room where father and son slept. She saw him leave minutes later, without the necklace, wiping his hands as if he had just touched trash. Victoria let out a scream, a guttural, animal sound of pure pain and horror. "No," she moaned, collapsing into the chair. "What have I done?" She hadn't just evicted an innocent man. She had condemned a father and a child to death by freezing, based on the lie of a snake she herself had fed. Tommy's drawing looked up at her from the desk. My family in the castle. And she, the queen of the castle, had thrown them to the wolves. Victoria didn't call the police. There was no time. She didn't call her driver. She ran. Barefoot, she grabbed the keys to her sports car. She flew to the elevator, her heart beating so fast it hurt.
The hunt to save their lives and her soul had begun. But outside, the snow fell harder than ever, erasing footprints, erasing paths, erasing lives.
The elevator plummeted like a stone in freefall, reflecting Victoria's stomach. When the doors opened in the underground garage, the sound of her bare feet slapping against the cold concrete echoed like gunshots. She didn't feel the cold. Adrenaline was a fire burning in her veins. She ran to her sports car, a machine of German engineering built for speed, not mercy. The engine roared, a guttural sound breaking the garage's silence. Victoria peeled out, tires screeching on the smooth floor. As she burst onto the street, the world had vanished. The blizzard had turned New York into a ghostly white desert. Visibility was zero. Snowplows passed like yellow monsters in the fog, and the few pedestrians were just shadows bent against the wind. Panic rose in Victoria's throat. She drove slowly, eyes scanning the snow-covered sidewalks. Every pile of trash looked like a body. Every shadow looked like a fallen man. She rolled down the window, letting the snow slice her face, screaming Ethan's name into the howling wind. But the wind only howled back, indifferent. Time was the enemy. It had been an hour since the expulsion, an hour at -10 degrees for a malnourished child, and a man without a proper coat was a death sentence. Victoria began to cry. Not the elegant weeping of a socialite, but the ugly, heaving sobs of someone realizing their money cannot buy back time. She slammed the steering wheel, cursing her arrogance, her blindness, her stupidity. She drove to the nearest park, Central Park, a place that by day was a garden, but at night, in these conditions, was an open-air tomb. She abandoned the car at the entrance, headlights cutting through the darkness, and ran inside. The snow reached her knees. Her silk dress tore on the bushes. She fell, got up, fell again. And then, near an old stone bridge, under an arch that offered minimal protection from the wind, she saw something.
It wasn't a movie scene. It was a scene of silent horror. Ethan was sitting on the frozen ground, leaning against the cold stone. But he wasn't dressed as he was when he left. He was in his shirt sleeves. His coat, his scarf, everything he had was wrapped around a small bundle in his lap. Victoria approached, breath caught in her throat. Ethan was blue. His eyelashes held ice crystals. He wasn't shivering anymore, and stopping shivering is the final sign before the end. He was in a state of stupor, eyes open but glazed, staring at nothing. Victoria fell to her knees in the snow beside him. She touched his face. It was like touching marble. "Ethan!" she screamed, shaking him. His head lolled slowly. He whispered something inaudible, lips barely moving. "Take the boy. Leave me here." Victoria ignored him. She opened the cocoon of clothes in his lap. Inside was Tommy. The boy was unconscious, but warm. The father had drained every ounce of heat from his own body to create a human furnace for his son. Tommy breathed, a faint cloud of vapor escaping his mouth. He was alive. Ethan had sacrificed himself, cell by cell, degree by degree, to keep that little flame burning. A superhuman strength took over Victoria. She wasn't a CEO anymore. She was a lioness. She lifted Ethan. How she did it with him being dead weight is a mystery only desperation explains. She dragged him through the snow, shouting at him not to close his eyes. She put Tommy in the back seat and Ethan in the front. She blasted the heat, and she drove as if the devil himself were chasing her, returning to the tower she called home, but which now needed to become a hospital.
The return to the penthouse was not quiet. Victoria didn't call the front desk. She called her personal doctor, screaming threats that if he wasn't there in 5 minutes, she would destroy his career. When the elevator doors opened to the penthouse, Marcus was there,
waiting, a smug smile on his face, ready to ask if the cleaning had been satisfactory. The smile died instantly. Victoria stepped out of the elevator, carrying Tommy in her arms, with Ethan leaning on her, half dragged, half walking. She looked at Marcus. There was no human anger in that look. There was the cold, absolute fury of a vengeful deity. "Get out," she said. The voice was low, terrible. Marcus tried to speak, to stammer an excuse. "If you are still here when I come back from this room," she continued, walking toward him without breaking eye contact, "I swear I will throw you off that balcony myself." Marcus saw the truth in her eyes. He saw the game was over. He saw the hidden camera blinking behind her. Pale, he backed away. The predator became the prey. He fled to the service elevator and vanished into the night, never to return. The next few hours were a blur of medical equipment, heated IV fluids and thermal blankets. The living room transformed into an intensive care unit. The doctor worked in silence. Victoria didn't leave the bedside. She held Ethan's freezing hand while he was delirious with fever, apologizing to his dead wife for failing, asking God to take his life in exchange for Tommy's. Victoria wept. She kissed that man's hand, hot tears falling on cold skin, whispering, "You didn't fail. You are the strongest man I have ever known. Stay with me. Please stay." Time passed. The fever broke. The winter outside began to lose its strength, and inside the penthouse, the ice melted too. It is weeks later, Thanksgiving Day. The atmosphere in the house is unrecognizable. The sterile smell of cleaning products has been replaced by the aroma of roast turkey, pumpkin pie, and cinnamon. There are no uniformed servants, just Victoria trying to cook and failing miserably, while Tommy, recovered and laughing, helps her mix the dough. Ethan enters the kitchen. He still walks with a slight limp, scars from that night, but his eyes are alive. He is clean, shaven, dressed in simple but dignified clothes. He looks at Victoria and his son. He smiles. It is a genuine smile, but in his eyes there is a shadow of goodbye. After dinner, when Tommy is already asleep on the sofa hugging his new dog, a gift from Victoria, Ethan calls her to the balcony. The city shines below, but now it seems less hostile. Ethan says what he has to say. He says he is grateful, that she saved their lives, but that he has to go. He cannot live on her charity. He is a man, a father, and he needs to look in the mirror and know he supports his son with his own sweat, not with the money of the woman he loves. Yes, he said he loved her. The words hung in the cold night air. Victoria didn't cry this time. She smiled. She walked to the railing and looked at the horizon. She said she knew he would say that. She said that was why she fell in love with him, for his unbreakable integrity. She took something out of her pocket. It wasn't money. It wasn't a check. It was keys. Heavy, old iron keys with a keychain from a construction company she had bought years ago and never used. "This isn't charity, Ethan," she said, placing the keys in his calloused hand. "There's a building in Brooklyn, an old abandoned project. The structure is good, the bones are strong, but it needs someone who knows how to build from nothing. I don't need a trophy boyfriend. I need a partner. I need a foreman I trust with my life." She closed his fingers over the keys. "Accept the job, pay your rent, pay for Tommy's school, and then," she leaned closer, eyes shining, "then take me out to dinner as an equal." Ethan looked at the keys, the weight of the future in his hand. He looked at Victoria. He saw not the billionaire, but the woman who ran barefoot in the snow for him. He put the keys in his pocket. He pulled her close. The kiss was the end of winter.